This afternoon, I'm laying out my plan to ensure that the United States will be the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world.
Since his electoral victory, Trump's transition team has tapped people championed by the crypto industry to lead various agencies.
The United States is planning to buy 1 million Bitcoin, which is about 5% of the total remaining supply. They're calling it the Bitcoin Act of 2024. Sounds wild, right? So naturally, people ask why. Why would America do this? Are they trying to take the lead in digital finance? Or is this just one of those peak stupid moments? Honestly, it feels like it came out of nowhere. Here's the thing, the government already owns around 207,000 Bitcoin. At $100,000 per coin, just sitting there's a lot of value. And now, this new act says all Bitcoin held by federal agencies has to be moved into something called a strategic Bitcoin reserve controlled by the Treasury. Do you ever wonder how the US government managed to get its hands on so much Bitcoin? It's not like they're out there mining it. Turns out, it's mostly from seizures linked to criminal activity. Take this guy for example, Ross Ulbricht, aka Dread Pirate Roberts. He was the mastermind behind the Silk Road. You know, that infamous dark web marketplace where you could buy drugs, guns, and even hire hitmen, all paid for in Bitcoin. It was like eBay, but for illegal stuff.
A U.S. man was able to hide behind a false identity, operating a sophisticated illegal drug website. The site operated much like eBay. It allowed users to buy and sell illegal drugs, guns, and even hire hitmen. The FBI spent 2 years trying to find the man behind the site.
The FBI spent 2 years tracking him down. In 2013, they finally caught him in a library, working on his laptop. Here's the kicker. He didn't get a chance to close the laptop or encrypt anything before they grabbed him. That was their big break. They needed to catch him while everything was open and running, and they did.
I think he initially thought he was being robbed of the computer, but then once identifications came out, he understood what
When they
was
first
happening.
approached him, he thought someone was just trying to steal his laptop. Imagine his face when they pulled out their FBI badges. Brutal, right? And just like that, they had access to all his Bitcoin, 144,000 of them to be exact. If you remember the whole Silk Road saga, you know this was a huge deal back then. Crazy story, huh? Alright, let's shift back to the Bitcoin Act for a second. This bill isn't just about shuffling around seized Bitcoins. It's way more ambitious than that. Here's the gist of it. The bill requires the Secretary of the Treasury to buy up to 200,000 Bitcoins per year over the next 5 years. That adds up to a whopping 1 million Bitcoins, which they plan to stash in a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And here's the kicker. They can't touch that reserve for at least 20 years. No selling, no trading, nothing. But it doesn't stop there. The Federal Reserve gets pulled into this too. The first $6 billion of earnings from Federal Reserve banks each year? Yeah, that's getting funneled into more Bitcoin purchases for the reserve. And then, there's the part that's making headlines. Talk about exchanging gold reserves for Bitcoin. Now let's talk about the part that's been making the rounds. This whole idea of trading gold for Bitcoin. It's not quite what people think. They're not literally selling off gold bars from Fort Knox. What they're doing is selling gold certificates. Here's how it works. The US government has around 8,133 metric tons of gold in reserve, valued at this ancient figure of $42.22 per ounce. That's been locked in place since 1973. If you do the math, it's only valued at about $11 billion. But in today's market, gold is going for about $2,700 an ounce, which means that reserve is worth closer to $775 billion. So instead of selling the gold itself, the Treasury plans to issue certificates based on that updated value. These certificates get converted into dollars, which they'll then use to buy Bitcoin. So yeah, technically, no actual gold changes hands, it's just paper. And apparently this approach is meant to be neutral for taxpayers. Senator Cynthia Lummis, who's behind the bill, told Bloomberg, "We already have financial assets in the form of gold certificates to convert to Bitcoin, so the effect on the US balance sheet is pretty neutral." But that raises the real question. Why? Why do this at all? What's the point of holding so much Bitcoin? The government's logic seems to be that while Bitcoin's value is all over the place in the short term, over the long haul, it's always gone up. And with its supply being capped, eventually, all the Bitcoin out there will be mined. It's essentially a scarce resource. If America can lock down a chunk of that and just sit on it, They're betting it'll become an appreciating asset on their balance sheet. The first big reason? National debt. The government is banking on Bitcoin's value going up over time. Since they can't just print more Bitcoin like they do with the dollars, the idea is that holding this finite asset will help chip away at the federal debt. They're aiming to reduce it by a whopping 50% within 2 decades. Imagine that, cutting down debt just by holding and waiting for Bitcoin's value to skyrocket. But there's also a geopolitical play here. The world isn't standing still, and the US knows it. Right now, the BRICS nations, think Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively moving away from the US dollar. They're ditching US treasuries and stocking up on physical gold. This isn't just a side hustle for them, it's a big shift. And America? They don't want to be left behind. Bitcoin could be their answer, a tool to maintain economic leverage over countries like China and Russia.
We don't want China or anybody else, and not just China, but others are embracing it, and we want to be the head.
Because Bitcoin is potentially a strategic reserve asset for the U.S. government.
Crypto reserve. But then last week we heard Vladimir Putin talking about it.
Want to ensure that the U.S. remains the world's global reserve currency. And if Bitcoin can be an adjacency to that and help support that proposition, then, I think there's a logic to that.
Even Michael Novogratz, the head of Galaxy Digital, is saying this could push Bitcoin's price to $500,000 per token. Why? Because once America starts stockpiling, other nations will feel the pressure to follow. Fortune magazine called it a potential digital gold rush. If the US plays its cards right, Bitcoin could slow down or even reverse the global shift toward physical gold. And in that scenario, the country with the most to gain is, you guessed it, the United States. It's bold, it's risky. But if the bet pays off, the US could use Bitcoin as a tool of economic statecraft to stay ahead on the global stage. If someone's already sitting on a hefty pile of Bitcoin, of course, they'd want this bill to pass. Why? Because it's simple economics. If the US government starts buying Bitcoin at this scale, prices will surge, and anyone holding Bitcoin will be laughing all the way to the bank. It's not just speculation either. Other players are joining in. Texas announced its bill to treat Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. It feels like a domino effect, doesn't it? And by the way, the US isn't even the first country to think this way. Remember El Salvador? Back in June 2021, under President Nayib Bukele, they made Bitcoin legal tender alongside the US dollar. To kick things off, they gave every citizen $30 in Bitcoin through the Chivo wallet. By February 2022, a Yale study showed that 78% of Salvadorans had downloaded the wallet. Today, El Salvador holds over 6,000 Bitcoins in its reserves. That's about 1.6% of their $36 billion GDP. And now, with countries like Russia and the US either talking about or actively integrating Bitcoin, it feels like we're watching the start of a global shift. Or is it all just hype? Honestly, with Bitcoin prices bullish right now, this could go either way. But here's an interesting twist. How did the US get here in the first place? Well, it all started on July 31st, 2024, when Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced the Bitcoin Act. And here's a fun fact. Cynthia bought her first Bitcoin way back in 2013. Guess who convinced her? Her son-in-law. That early investment didn't just make her a believer, it earned her the nickname Crypto Queen in Congress. But here's where things get even murkier. The rabbit hole goes deeper. During the 2024 elections, the crypto industry was the biggest spender of any sector. They pumped a whopping $200 million into both candidates' campaigns. So it's not too far-fetched to think that their influence played a role in Bitcoin being treated so favorably on the political stage. However, when we look at the public's view of crypto, things aren't quite as rosy. Take platforms like Pump Fun, for example. It's a crypto website where anyone can create their own coin in a second. The issue? There have been viral scams, like a little kid pulling off a rug pull of $50,000. Not to mention the infamous HODL. It's clear the industry is fraught with issues. So, people often mistakenly tie these scams and rug pulls directly to Bitcoin, which has its own reputation to uphold. This brings us to a very important question. What is Bitcoin's true function? Is it meant to be a medium of exchange, or is it simply a store of value? Over the past decade or so, it seems the consensus has shifted. Bitcoin is less of a currency and more of a store of value. Why? Well, compared to other cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin's transactions are slow, and let's not even get started on how expensive they are. In comparison to regular bank transactions, Bitcoin isn't great for day-to-day use, but as a store of value, Bitcoin has proven itself. In fact, about 70% of Bitcoin hasn't moved in the last year, meaning people are hoarding it, using it like a savings account. Then, in early December, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell made a pretty bold statement. Bitcoin is not a competitor to the dollar, it's a competitor to gold. Essentially, people use Bitcoin just like they use gold.
People use Bitcoin as a speculative asset, right? It's like gold. It's just like gold, only it's virtual, it's digital. People are not using it as a form of payment or as a store of value. It's highly volatile. It's not a competitor for the dollar. It's really a competitor for gold.
Now, gold has its industrial uses and other applications outside of finance, but in a strict financial sense, Bitcoin does mirror gold in some ways. Bitcoin was originally designed to do just that, act as a kind of digital gold. However, there's a huge problem here. Bitcoin is still a risky asset. It's volatile, and its price could theoretically go to zero at any point. So the question is, should Bitcoin be a financial reserve asset for the world's largest economy? Does it have the ability to stand the test of time? After all, it's only been around for 16 years. Jennifer J. Schul, the director of financial regulation studies at the Cato Institute, pointed out in a Bloomberg interview that Bitcoin hasn't proven itself as a stable asset. She says it's still putting government money on the line, and Bitcoin has not shown itself to be a particularly stable asset. The bill asks senators and members of Congress, who may not understand crypto all that well, to make a much bigger leap of faith in terms of long-term viability. But here's the thing, if you've been following Bitcoin from the very beginning, you might already have some red flags going off. Doesn't all of this go against Bitcoin's original principles? After all, Bitcoin was created in response to the failures of the traditional banking system, the screw-ups and bailouts of 2008. It was meant to be an alternative to the very system that caused the financial crisis. So now, the government wants to use Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Doesn't this open the door for potential corruption down the line? The US government could easily amend the Bitcoin bill and simply print more dollars to buy up as much Bitcoin as they want. This raises the question, could Bitcoin be captured by governments in the future? We don't know, but as of now, it looks like the US government is piggybacking on a financial asset that's already in use, rather than building their own. It's a lot to think about. So some people believe that this could be a precursor to the central bank digital currency CBDC, which the Federal Reserve has been working on for quite some time now. But that's a whole different topic for another day. I think the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is zero. At the moment, it's more of a risk asset, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. The real value of Bitcoin lies in its network. The blockchain and its cryptographic, distributed nature have proven to be unhackable and trustless, which is huge. I'm not talking about the scammers using Bitcoin to commit fraud, because let's face it, scammers use dollars for that too. What I mean is the underlying technology and the network effect. Sure, there are better crypto tokens out there, but do people know their names? Not really. But Bitcoin? Everyone knows it. Now what's next? Once the bill passes the Senate, it still needs support from the House of Representatives. But you can imagine how much lobbying from the crypto industry could influence this. Interestingly, there has been bipartisan support. Democrat Ronna, for example, has supported this bill in the past. So is the Bitcoin Act of 2024 likely to fully pass? Well, that's still up in the air. Betting odds on Polymarket give it a 30% chance. And that's the thing, there are a lot of hurdles to overcome, like lawmakers, regulations, and public distrust. But with enough lobbying from the crypto industry, it could happen. We'll just have to wait and see, both on the federal level and what's happening in Texas. In conclusion, is this innovation, or is it a sign of desperation? Is America trying to take the easy way out by creating wealth through financial engineering instead of focusing on rebuilding manufacturing or boosting productivity? Or is this the future, with America realizing the potential of digital currencies? Right now, we can't truly say for sure. But one thing is clear, this is fascinating, even if risky. So, what do you guys think? Is this a good idea or not? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I hope you liked it.